Welcome to Gold Derby's TV Sound Panel. I am Senior Editor Marcus Dixon, and we are here with Brent Findley, Supervising Sound Editor on Apple TV Plus's Ted Lasso. Brent, you are a two-time Emmy nominee for Ted Lasso Season 1 and Season 2. Tell us about what those experiences were like for you being nominated by your peers in the sound branch.
I can't even, I don't know what words there are to describe that, um, besides just being, a few inches off, floating a few inches off the ground the whole time. It's just flat, very flattering, humbling. There's so much good material out there. Everybody's is just bringing their best work to the table, and so to be acknowledged by that, by everyone in the sound community for that was really, really an honor, and just speechless about it.
And moving on to Season 3, which is airing now on Apple. The sixth episode is called Sunflowers, and that's the one that's being submitted in the sound categories for this year's Emmys. And this was the one that was set in Amsterdam. It kind of felt like a mini movie. All the characters had their own storylines. Is that how you approached it as a movie, basically?
Oh, absolutely. Every episode this season feels like it has a movie arc where all the episodes have a longer runtime. But the Amsterdam episode, especially, it's a road trip for the team. They go on the road. They're out of town, so it's a little. I think we're barely in the, if at all, in the locker room and Ted's office at all. So we go to this new location, and it's a chance for everybody to kind of explore parts of their story that we don't get to when we're in Richmond. So it's definitely, and it had a different kind of feel to it. And it became the episode that was the dearest to our hearts as the sound team. So every episode is our favorite sound baby, of course. you know, but there's always one or two a season that is very special. And for 306 for us, doesn't mean it wasn't necessarily the toughest editorially wise. There's some very complex game sequences, things that are just really knuckle down, figure this out technical sequences, but it is more of a musicality and a flow, and where we could craft the flow of the sound design and the soundscape. 306 was definitely brought all the feels for us as the sound team.
And as the characters are walking down the streets of Amsterdam in the red light district, what are some ambient sounds you had to work on that were new to the series?
Well, one thing for sure is the local language. So we had our loop group. We had to make sure our Walla group could all natively speak Dutch. So, and there's a little bit of an Easter egg throughout the series, or I'm sorry, throughout the episode, especially as Rebecca is on the bike path, and then as in the red light district, we have Higgins and in our kit man going to the jazz club. Every time there's a bike that goes by, somebody yells something in Dutch at our tourists. And sometimes it's just tourist in Dutch. But we did a little thing where we took all the little expletives throughout the series in English and had our Dutch Walla group translate those into the versions that the Dutch person would say, like wanker, but what's the Dutch version of that? So there's a little shout out every time somebody almost gets run over by a bike. And it's just tucked in there. Not overt, not waving a flag about it, but it's a neat little localization that was fun to do.
Now I want to rewatch the
Yeah.
episode with a Dutch person to translate.
Yeah.
You mentioned Rebecca Hannah Waddingham's character. She falls into the canal, so you had to have all these water sounds, which is unusual for Ted Lasso. And then there's this new set piece where she goes on this mystery man's boat for the whole day. Can you tell us about those scenes?
Something is very special about her falling off the bridge into the water. Our Foley team, Sana Kelly, and her Matt Salib and her team really did a great job with the water effects. There is, back in 303, Rebecca goes to see her mom's psychic. And during that process, she's getting these readings. Was something that Jason Sudeikis wanted us to do was travel through all of the emotional touchstones of that reading using crystal singing bowls through all the chakras that were going through that conversation. So every time there was something, and I say every time, we kind of take this trip from sacral to mind to heart touching on every time we talk about family or we talk about love or we talk about the future or the unknown, we kind of dip in and out of those different chakras that speak to those different levels of our awareness. And so in that reading of 303, our psychic talks about Rebecca being upside down. And in 306, Rebecca goes upside down into the water. That's what that's, kind of a foreshadowing. And so we brought that chakra ball back in sound design, which was, I got the note here. It's for the upside down, we use the sacral, which is centered. The chakral tones are not necessarily perfectly tuned to our Western tuning, but the closest is F for sacral, and the heart is A. Those are kind of the central tones of that. So we kind of wove those in with Tom Howe's score. So sound design and score, we worked very well together to have those notes be sympathetic to each other. Sympathetic to each other instead of dissonant or rubbing against each other. So it's just a neat little thing. It just dips its head in there just a little bit as she comes up out of the water, but it's a nice little touch. We specifically refrained from doing creaking and rocking inside the boat. We're so intimate in there, and for so long, we just didn't want to start that to call out and be a thing. We're kind of get out of the way of the story. And that's kind of one of our favorite things to do is, or maybe we'll set something up and then just get out of the way, because the story and the acting is so good. We certainly don't want to impede that. We want to support that.
So fascinating. The most memorable scene in this episode is when Jason Sudeikis visits the American-themed restaurant, and he has this sort of psychedelic trance where he uncovers a new coaching method called total football. That must have been a really fun sequence to put together.
That was fantastic, and it took us weeks. We had so much back and forth because we're working hand in hand with the animation people. So every time the animation changed, Jason was getting versions of that. We'd do versions of the sound to speak to that, to see how it all would work together. So from the moment I think we first start to dip into it, he gets the barbecue sauce, and we kind of go into this little muffle a moment into his head a little bit. He opens up the barbecue sauce, which is from Kansas City. Like, why did you pick this one? Because it's the best one, she says. And he's, we don't know that if he's under the influence of that wonderful tea Beard made or not. As we found out later, it was a dud batch. So however this happened, then he starts to envision these things. But before he even gets into that, we were able to get Marv Albert, to recall that 94 Bulls game, to integrate to make more obvious the triangle offense the Bulls were using. So in that actual call of that game, he didn't specifically, at that time, overtly discuss the triangle offense. So Marv was gracious enough to lend his vocal cords to redoing some of those lines and inserting some things specifically about the triangle offense into that broadcast, which is just a fantastic thing to be able to do. And then he goes into this vision with the true spirit of adventure, which is the legendary Corey Burton of our wonderful old time animated cartoons like Rocky and Bullwinkle. He's got that beautiful voice. So so Ted has this conversation with, I guess, himself, however you translate that into being. But it was a delicate balance in Sean Byrne and Ryan Kennedy, our re-recording mixers, really deftly moved the sound effects and balanced the sound effects, the music, and the dialogue, trying to get it all to be intelligible and to follow, because we're actually learning something here. This is an educational portion of our episode. To still be able to understand everything, but also have a little point on some of these animations, which was very fun to do.
The bike scene where Jamie teaches Roy how to ride a bike. I mean, that's probably the funniest scene of the whole season. We're almost running out of time. Is there anything you can tell us about that from the sound department's perspective?
I think Foley had a wonderful time throwing a bike around. Sometimes they get to have fun. Yeah, and clanking and chunking on the pedals and things. When they're riding out on, I mean, it's just a wonderful bonding experience for them. And then when they're riding down the path, they're behind a cart, and so the cart was making more noises, no more noise than the bike. So that was we didn't want to ADR that scene. It's so perfect the way they interact with each other. So it was a heavy duty combination of noise reduction and preserving the dialogue, but also then putting the bike sounds back in, because we, kind of we're focusing on the dialogue at the time. So we lose some of the practical effects trying to get rid of the noise around the dialogue. So then we got to put the bicycle sounds back in. So yes, Jason his library is so deep of references he can pull from. And he told me what movie reference that bike scene is from, and I don't remember, but it's definitely one of those things where it's a nod. He's got a favorite list of movies that he does all these little nods to. So that was one of them.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with us today. And there are millions of fans out there that hope the third season is not the end, that it continues on. And I know you probably can't say anything about that.
Well, I'm one of those fans too that hopes it continues on, because as a fan, I love the show too.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for chatting with us today.
Thank you.